We are going to be talking about how to deal with anxious and controlling parents. And we are speaking from having experience being anxious and controlling parents, and maybe being somewhat in the recovery reformed camp, but still learning.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, Anne, thank you so much for having us on. What a pleasure and a privilege it is for us to join you today. Thank you. I think that we thought we would start with a story that kind of typifies what it is to be an anxious and controlling parent. I think that there might be some value in getting a parental perspective and to see how that can unfold. But we have many classic stories in that vein. But one comes to mind, doesn't it, this morning? We thought we'd share that. Did
you want to say more context about why we chose it?
Well, I think because it's kind of an example of separate realities and how extreme you can go off on a tangent in that respect, and how you can get so wrapped around the axle with your thinking. And it's a doozy, I would say.
So
do you want to kick things off?
I'll kick it off. So this is one of our real life parenting stories, and a little bit of context with it was with one of our children. We won't name which one. They'll probably both be no, they're fine. That they're in the teenage years, and there had been some drinking that happened, and there had been some kind of picking up, and the young person not being okay and taking her home, and just not stuff that happens, but scary for parents. So within the context of that happening fairly recently, we had an agreement with our daughter that at a certain time she would check in with us and confirm the plans of where she was staying that night, and just make sure that she had arrived at her destination. And so at that time, I think it was actually a little bit after that time, Angus and I had been watching a show on television. I looked at my phone and I realized that she hadn't checked in.
Can I just
yes,
1 second?
Yes.
I think it's important to say that it was at this point written in stone that her phone should always be on and she should always be accessible, particularly late at night.
Yes, and especially because of what had happened, because we want to make sure that she's safe and okay. So at this point in time, nothing. And then we have in our family, we agreed that we're all on the Find a Friend app for safety reasons. And so we go to the Find a Friend app on the iPhone, and there's no Find a Friend there's no dot showing up, right?
No, that's
that's not true. That's not true. There is a dot showing up.
Oh my goodness, get your story straight.
That's right. There's other times where the dots are showing. There is a dot showing up. And so we're trying to reach her. We're like, oh, good. Her phone is on, because normally the phone is not on when these kind of things are going. So the phone is on. And so we start calling and we start texting, and there's no answer. And so the dot is in one location, which is not where she's supposed to be. We can't get a hold of her. And then the dot moves to another location.
The dot's on the move.
The dot's on the move. The dot moves to another location, which is this park outside in LA. And so I'm like, Angus, she must not be okay. We've got to go get her. We've got to go get her. I mean, like, what? She's not calling. I don't know what's happened. Maybe she's passed out. Like, we just have to go.
It was like the FBI watching your target move deep into enemy territory, and we can't do anything about. They're off radio contact.
We've lost connection. So it's probably 12:30 at night by this point.
Yeah.
We were thinking we're going to be going to bed. So the two of us get into the car. And we're driving down, and the whole time we're driving, I'm looking at this dot. Now it's staying at the second location, but we're following this dot. And as we're driving there, and we're about half an hour away, and we're driving down Topanga Canyon. At one point, I said to Angus, and I don't know why I said it, but I just said, God, what if something's happened to her? Like, it just came to my mind. I wasn't really feeling like anything terrible had happened. I just thought, oh, she's got drunk and I don't know, passed out, like, which is not good. But I was like, at one point, I'm like, what if something terrible's happened? So I said this to Angus, and I think you can take over from there. Well, so we're driving, following the dot, and I say this comment to you.
That's right. And I think the thing that was so disconcerting, this was our first experience where, we've had many experiences where she kind of like disappeared off the ether. She's just not making any attempt to contact us. But this is the first situation where the phone is obviously on. We can see where she's going, but she's just not picking up. She's just not picking up, and we're calling and we're calling. And so we get to the point where, yeah, we better go and check things out and drive down there. And Rohini makes some comment about it.
I said that.
I don't know. Well, you make this comment. And I guess the backstory for me at that point is, I don't know, for whatever reason, I had been listening to a lot of cold case files, podcasts. There's a real fad for cold case files. And I had listened to probably 2 or 3 of them. So, and back to back. So I'd kind of had this in my mind that, all sorts of terrible things could happen. So as soon as she said that, my mind started to get really engaged with this, all the horrors that could have befallen our youngest daughter. So
we weren't saying which one.
Oh, right, we can cut that out. You have to cut that out, Anne.
No, it's fine.
She's going to figure it out. So in my mind, it's kind of like, oh my goodness, this is, she's been abducted. I mean, I was already, feeling pretty stressed out, but because I was already, really sped up, the whole idea of all those possibilities just came rushing into my mind. So I started to get a bit panicky and started imagining all these horrible scenarios. And the dot had found its way to an area that, is an area that I think a lot of teenagers maybe go to, but at this time of night seemed unusual. So anyway, we get to this area. We're going to be specific about geographics. So there's a point on the coast where there's a lookout. So a lot of people will go there late at night, but it's not, late at night, it's probably not the most desirable of points for your offspring to be walking around or whatever they're doing. Anyway, so we get there, and then the dot, and I guess the technology is not very well. It didn't at first seem very specific because it's kind of bouncing all over the place. And I guess with satellites, they're not. They go in and out in terms of their fine tuning.
So we're these 2 parents wandering around the bluffs, looking at our phone, trying to find this blue dot. Sometimes it's over the cliff. Sometimes, and we're talking to people. Have you seen this girl? And so anyway.
Well, what's the worst part of it was that the dot kept fine tuning itself to a point where it was over the cliff. So I was getting completely freaked out because you're trying to sort of work out an average as to where she might be with this dot. And more often than not, and it was bouncing about quite a bit, but kept pinging back to being over the cliff. And I'm, oh my God, she's been taken and she's been thrown over the cliff. So I was just so distraught by this point, really sped up, running around like a crazy man, asking people, who were just trying to mind their own business and have a nice romantic evening on a seat looking at the Pacific Ocean. Like, I've seen this girl, she's this high, just giving this full-on description. And they're getting kind of a little annoyed at me at this point. And then there was this new ping that started to take place where it started to take us back to the car park. And I thought, well, this is bizarre. But it then kept pinging back to this specific point. And it kept pinging back to this. There was one solitary vehicle, excuse me, in the car park. So I walked over to the vehicle and it kept doing, and at this point it's oh yeah, it's telling us that the phone is in this car. And it kind of I was looking in, trying to see what was going on. And then Rohini came up alongside me and we both kind of there's something about this car, and it's the only car in the car park. And then finally I managed to look through the back window, and there was a naked female torso in the back, head buried into the seat. And I just completely freaked out and thought, oh my goodness, it was one of those moments where my knees went to jelly. It was my worst case scenario just come to life in my mind. And Rohini's well,
you said, I'm going to smash the window.
I'm going to smash the window.
So he yells, I'm going to smash it. And I said, no, let's call 911.
Because it was locked and it wouldn't open. So as soon as Rohini said, I'm going to call 911, a door opened and a hand came out with a phone and saying, XX is not here.
She's not in the car. So we're handed this phone, which is our daughter's phone. We know she's not in the car, and the door just shuts. And so I'm looking at Angus, and then I say back to the car, I say, do you know where she is? door opens again and they say, hang on a minute. And they shut the door. And then I don't know if the window opened or something. And they said, she's at this person's house. And which was where she was supposed to be, was what she had agreed upon.
All along, exactly where she said she would be.
And so we go there and we check. We couldn't just go home and leave her there. So we go there and let her know what's been going on. And she's been there since 9:30 at night, fine. And she had just left her phone in her friend's car, and she didn't think to call us and let us know that that was what was happening, because we had been so adamant about her keeping her phone on her that she didn't want us to be angry with her. And so she, in a teenage mind, it made more sense to just kind of see if it would just go unmissed than to reach out and tell us and then have us get angry with her, which is, clearly on us, that she was afraid to tell us what had happened. So
because she'd lost a couple of phones, so she thought, oh my goodness, if I've done this again, they're not going to be thrilled with me at all. So she just decided to keep things really quiet.
Yeah. So she was, I don't even know, maybe we woke her up. She was tucked up safe and sound at her friend's house.
And her phone had just dropped out in the friend's vehicle. And the friends, they decided, let's go to the bluff and have some fun, which we interrupted. I think the term is coitus interruptus.
Stop it, Angus. And sorry, you're going to have to do a lot of editing maybe for your webinar. But, we thought this was a good story to share on many levels. One is just...
Can I just say one thing? Because it's kind of amusing thinking back. So these kids in the car, their wisdom was just telling them to play possum, to play dead. So they did a very good job at playing dead, because that's what I saw through the window.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But just to really highlight that parents do not have it all figured out. Like, we are on a major learning curve. We are figuring things out as we go along. It is, it's, for most parents, it's new territory, how to deal with a lot of things that come up for teenagers and young adults. And so it's sort of, we're all doing our best. So any kind of compassion or patience you might have for parents, even the crazy ones like us, would always be appreciated. And the second part is to really, I think the story illustrates how we really are living in our own reality. And when Angus and I were talking about the story, the visual that came to mind is that we were each had our own set of virtual reality goggles on. And as Angus and I were driving down there, I had mine on that was like, oh my gosh, maybe she's passed out somewhere, maybe she's not okay. And Angus has his virtual reality goggles on, like, oh no, she's been abducted and she's like dead. And, and our, daughter is like in her virtual reality, like, I'm totally fine drinking milk and eating cookies at my friend's house, probably so innocent. And just like, we're all living in these different perspectives, and we're all seeing things, and they can be wildly different or they can overlap. But even when they're wildly different, I think it's where there's where the communication piece is so important, is that we can find common ground, that with communication, with understanding, and that's where I feel like we were, we had hit below the mark as parents, that we had a relationship with our daughter at that time where she couldn't just use her friend's phone and say, hey, I've lost my phone, but I want you to know that I'm, where I'm said I was going to be. And so don't worry. And, hopefully I'll find my phone. And if I don't, we'll deal with that. But that's where we had at that point really missed the mark as parents, because of what had been going on previously, lost phones, all those kinds of things. We had, in our fear, in our anxiety, we had come down really hard on her. And I mean, we didn't mean to be coming down hard on her. We were doing what we felt was going to help her to not get into dangerous situations and to keep her safe. But the way that we did it, and I don't know that we even necessarily felt that we were coming down hard even at the time, but she felt that, like, that was her experience. And so that was the part where there was not clear communication and clear understanding in terms of what her experience was and what felt right. And so the rapport in our relationship was at a real low. And when rapport and relationship is at a real low, you know, of course, a young person is going to do everything they can to not make it worse. It was actually because she didn't want to disappoint us. She was feeling, it wasn't even about her. I don't even think she was actually, it wasn't so much about getting into trouble now as I'm remembering it, is that she didn't want to be another disappointment to us one more time with one more thing where she didn't get it right. And because we had had a litany of this and this and this, and I can't believe you've done this again. How can you lose your phone the third time? Like whatever these things are. And now looking back, you know, I really feel, you know, I feel badly. I feel, you know, my conscience comes in like, wow, I wish I had seen that more at the time, how my harshness was really unkind. And my frustration was, you know, not seeing the variables in her life and understanding the complexity of what she was up against, and how in the complexity of her life, yeah, you lose a phone once in a while. I mean, it's not like it's a good thing, but like these kinds of things happens. Or if you haven't really drank and you drink, sometimes you drink. I know that happened to me when I was a kid. You drink too much, you don't realize that's what's going to happen. And as much as I'd rather none of that happen, it's like we have to deal with what is. And as parents, like for young people, what I want to say is that when we're behaving badly, it's probably because we're scared. It's probably because we feel completely in over our head and we don't know what to do. And so one of the ways that parents can react, and how we reacted, is that we got controlling. We got controlling and tried to manage. And as our level of control went up, our level of empathy went down, not because we don't love our kids, but just because we're scared, and the fear was dominating rather than the empathy. And, you know, as a kid, it's like, well, what do you do when your parents are crazy and they're anxious and they're getting controlling? Like, how do you deal with that? And one of the most important things, and I don't know how easy this is going to be, but we've definitely talked about it with both of our daughters, is can you not take our crazy personally? You know, we're not going to be perfect. We want to be better. We want to learn. We want to show up as empathetic, loving, open-hearted parents and not lose our minds and do crazy things. But sometimes we might do that. Like sometimes life might just get us wrapped around the axle of our virtual reality movie, and that might be what happens to us. So, you know, if you can't control that, which you can't, are you able to not take it personally and have some perspective and seeing like, oh, you know, my parents being really strict or really judgmental or really critical, that's really nothing to do with me. That's them. That's their issue. That's their problem. So to me, that's one of the first things, like if you can see that, I think that would be really helpful. And then the second part is if you're able to see that, then there may be an opportunity to, when your parents have settled down and come back to earth and they're, you know, not in the full on crazy, but whatever you're willing to do to share how life looks to you, and to really see if there can be some understanding around that. And I know that was one of the things that really changed for us, is that because it seemed for us as parents that a lot of things had happened in a short amount of time that were really kind of felt like a big deal and scary to us, we sort of went into like lockdown mode, control mode, clamp down, because it's like, what do we do? What do we do here? But when we had the opportunity to sort of really hear what was going on for our daughter, she was able to kind of let us know, like, hey, I am learning. Like, I'm not perfect, but I'm learning. And you're not giving me the chance to show you that. And you're also not giving me the chance to learn from the mistakes that I make in what you're doing. And how am I going to learn if you don't let me make mistakes? So me having to get it right all the time isn't going to work either. You have to give me the space that allows me even to make mistakes and be okay with that. And, you know, when we were in a place to hear, when we were more settled within ourselves and able to really hear that, we're like, oh yeah, of course. Like, how do people learn? They learn through doing. And when we're learning, we always make mistakes, like I do. And so like the logic, we could not argue with the logic. And so we completely had to change. I don't know if you want to talk about this part.
Yeah, no, what's really coming to mind for me now is that in my role as a father, I was trying to sort of imagine the mistakes that could be made and then preempt them with whatever controls I could put in place. And that was entirely through my own fear. And what that created was a culture, in a sense, where the child is not really, or the teenager, whatever, however we're going to whatever label we're going to put on that, is actually starting to lose confidence about the decisions that they can make, about really being able to follow the thread of their own wisdom. And as soon as I got that, as soon as I kind of grasped that understanding that, yeah, they have access to exactly the same resources for wisdom as we all do as human beings, then if I can actually allow them to see that I believe in them on that level, then there's a level of confidence that comes with it. And that, yes, we're all going to make mistakes. That's kind of like what we do as human beings. We learn by our mistakes and we adapt and move forward. And we have access to our wisdom, and that allows us to grow and prosper. But if I'm actually robbing my child of that possibility, I'm really depriving them of a great opportunity just to blossom. And I think that, I feel like I was very guilty as a parent, because kids don't come with a reference guide. We're kind of figuring out as we go along, of just trying to sort of really, I don't know, I felt like I created a culture where if you make a mistake, then there are consequences, and that really damaged rapport. And the best thing that we can hope for as a family is that we're all able to communicate in a very honest and open way. And if I've created a culture where you make a mistake and there's going to be consequences, and people are going to get angry, or people are going to get upset, and there's a fear that revolves around that, then that connection, the possibility for that connection is really damaged. So I take complete accountability for kind of creating that. And the best that we can do now is just do everything in our power to connect, have good rapport, have conversation, and feel that there's a safety in that. And not only there's a safety in that, but there's a beautiful sense of self-confidence that comes with that. And now we're seeing that come alive in both our daughters in no uncertain terms. It's just like there's a sense of confidence in the way that they show up in the world. It's really beautiful to see. But I felt like I was constantly trying to prune back that tree until it got to the point where there was just no room to grow in a sense. So I don't know, that's what's really coming forward for me, is just this sense of self that comes out of this sort of like having people around you that are really like, yeah, you have your wisdom, you'll figure this out. It'll be hard at times, but I'm not going to judge you for it. And if you feel like it's a problem, just come talk to us about it. And whatever mistake they make, losing their phone, in a sense, we kind of got to be able to just sort of like have a neutral conversation about that. And that's been a huge learning curve for me. How do you get neutral when, in the face of that? And sometimes you don't, but, kind of have that as your North Star.
Absolutely. And that, with what we've seen in our family is that when we got controlling, and both of our daughters were kind of different in their wildness and how that showed up as teenagers. So you think like, oh, we figured out it here. And then it's like, no, we haven't figured out it here. So it's like,
yeah, we thought we were experts after the first one.
Yeah, we like got brought to our knees. It's like, we know nothing. But what we've been able to see in different ways, but with both of them, is that when we clamped down, when we let our fear drive our decisions regarding them and behaved in ways that were controlling, things got worse. Their behavior got worse. Their behavior escalated, and escalated ways that we would like, my God, I can't even imagine that, as parents, this would be happening. And so our minds would go to, well, we just clamped down even more, like we were not putting the dots together. Like, I guess the other thing to recognize is sometimes parents can be really slow learners. And, sometimes it takes a lot to figure things out. And we are people that, you would think would be fairly decent learners. And I would say we were really slow in this area because of our fear, because of our anxiety. And so, but what we saw, like, so we would clamp down even more, and then the behavior would escalate even more. Like, oh, that means we must have to clamp down even more. And so it's like, what are we going to do? Just, lock them in the room?
It was like we had a weapons closet of consequences. And there'd be one transgression. Okay, we'll get this consequence out and we'll try that on for size. And lo and behold, it made no impact whatsoever. And something even more grandiose happened on the transgression.
So then we better fill this one out. And like, so yeah, so then
we were all out of weapons at the end.
Yeah, it was like, this escalation going on. And so when we finally saw, like, hey, like, get a grip here. And what's the most important thing? The most important thing is that the relationship is really the most important thing. And when we realized that we needed to really respect their wisdom, like you're saying, Angus, to respect that we might not agree with their choices, we might not, be behind them, but we have to respect their innate wisdom. And it's not about what they're doing or not. Like, they have that innate wisdom inside of them. They are listening to it. And as much as our fear is like, oh my God, what's that going to, if we give them freedom and they're listening to the wisdom, where's that going to take them? Well, where it took them was like completely different than where they were going. It was like complete turnaround. And so it
was a miracle.
It kind of felt that way, but it's like, it was just so humbling to see that we were, Angus and I are working with the theme of, rewilding relationships, rewilding ourselves. And, with this, it was like rewilding in the family, like their natural, we were trying to tame them. We were trying to cultivate them. We were trying to fit them to the shape that we thought would be best for them. But when we let them be themselves, when we let them follow their innate wisdom, their innate knowing, they make great choices. Yeah,
who knew that their essential nature take them back into well-being?
Total well-being.
Why would we trust that?
And it's like, the elder one got herself to college. The younger one decided she didn't want to do traditional high school. She tested out. She's got a job. She's going to college a year early. Like, what were we trying to manage? Like, what were we trying to say? What else is there to do? And most importantly, we hope, and obviously we keep in conversation about this, but most importantly, we hope that we are people that they know, that they feel loved by, and that they feel safe with. Most important, I think they always knew that we loved them, but most importantly, that they feel safe with us, that they can be all of themselves, and that they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to have things figured out, that they can show us all of who they are, and that they can feel that we are not going to judge them, that we are going to love them and not try to change them. And what, through all of this learning, like, the good news is that they they see our humanness. Like, they laugh about us, they laugh about our crazy, and so they don't really take it personally. They just realize, like, yeah, mom can get really anxious at times, and dad can get kind of annoyed at times, and they behave not so great when they're like that. But it's kind of, they have room for as we have room for their humanness, they have room for our humanness. And so as a family, we're not trying to be the perfect parents. There's room for us to be figuring things out too. And there's room for them to be figuring things out as well. And to me, that just takes the whole pressure off. And ultimately, what we respect, or what we do our best to respect, is not our anxiety, not our fear, not our ideas about what they should be up to in the world. What we want to respect is that there's this deeper wisdom and intelligence inside of each one of us that is coming into being. And we don't have to have any idea about what that's going to look like. We don't need to control it or manipulate it or change it in any way. And that is inside of every single one of us. And so for a young person, if you can't see that inside of your parents, it is there. They're just scared and crazy right now. And for you to recognize you have that as your resource. And even if your parents can't figure it out, like Angus and I, like we were lost for a little while there. Like, even if your parents can't figure it out, it doesn't matter, because you have it inside of you, and hopefully they will figure it out. But what's most important is that that you've got what you need inside of you, and that you just listen to that. And it's always nice when it comes together, but when it doesn't come together, like for our kids, what I really see is that in a sense they respected that inside of themselves. They weren't really willing to be cultivated or tamed. They're like, yeah, we're going to do what we're going to do what we're going to do, and I guess we're going to figure this out. But what they couldn't do is they went underground because they couldn't really share everything with us, or not that they have to share everything, but there was just a culture of deceit because of what Angus and I had created in terms of our consequences. So, I mean, we hope that just shows the humanness and shows some of the, the flip side of what it is on the parenting level, and for kids to, recognize that the anger, the controlling, the consequences, the shaming, the things that parents do that they're not proud of, ultimately just comes when we've lost our way and we've got really scared, and we're doing that as a way to try and feel safe again inside of ourselves. Even though it doesn't work, we still sometimes fall off the cliff of sanity and do things like that.
Yeah, and I think that I think the other thing to take into consideration is that when we're facing our fears, we kind of really tapping out of our wisdom in a sense to a degree, and it's very easy to come up with all kinds of crazy narratives. And I joke about that experience with one of our daughters, maybe the eldest one, maybe we can label her now. Where at a point where she had done all kind, in my mind, for my money, had done all kinds of crazy things, and they were just getting more and more extreme. And the more and more extreme the behavior was, as far as I was concerned, the more extreme my consequences were, as far as she was concerned. So it got to that point where I feel like I had used up all my weapons, and I was like, what do I do? I mean, I really got to the point where, talk about being distraught with my thinking. I just like, oh my God, I think she's just gonna, everything is just gonna fall apart at the seams here. I think she's just really running headlong into disaster. What does this experience we're having now look like as an adult? Is this someone who's just gonna be just suffering for the rest of their life? I mean, that's the extremity of my thinking at that point. And so very fortunately, I was being mentored at the time, and the feedback that I was giving was like, yeah, it was all pointing to communication. It was all pointing to rapport. You've got to allow them the freedom to make their own mistakes. And that to me was just such an extreme point of view. It's like, my programming, all I really had to go on was, how I was brought up by my parents. And I can remember thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to do things entirely differently when I have kids. And the fact is like, oh, my parents were right. Kids are crazy. You have to really stamp down on them. This is obviously how you rock. This is how you roll as a parent. They were right. I had a whole new respect for them at that point, but it wasn't working. We joke about this now with our eldest daughter, but there was a point where she was grounded. She'd had her phone taken away, and she'd somehow managed to communicate with some friends and walked out across the roof in the middle of the night and jumped into a vehicle. I thought she was in bed, and I get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from the police, and they're saying that, we have your daughter. She's in a car park in a church in Malibu. And they have pretty strict laws around curfew here. So it's like, it's breaking the law to be out and about being a teenager beyond 10 p.m. at night. So, that in itself was just really the extent of the transgression. But I'm picking up the phone and she was the first one to talk to me, and she's saying, can you come and get me? And I was like, well, what do you mean come and get you? You're upstairs, aren't you? How do I need to come and get you? No, I'm in Malibu. So for me, that was like, at that point, I'm like, I don't know what's happening. I'm like, almost like this deer in the headlights. I don't know what to do. What's going to happen? It's like, where is this all going to go? And it was really, for me, just to have this experience, like, yeah, try that on for size, taking your hands off the controls. I have nothing at this point. I don't know how to move forward. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how worse it can get, but we'll try this on for size. And then to see this this beautiful human being just suddenly like be allowed to sort of follow the thread of their own wisdom and make their own decisions. Here's someone who was really struggling at school, really having, a lot of anxiety and difficulty in life perhaps. And then just to find her balance, to find her equilibrium. And then just all of a sudden, like it was amazing to me to think that here was someone who wasn't doing very well in school, just suddenly like figuring it out all on her own, get into an amazing university, get great grades and really prosper. That was nothing to do with me in terms of like my fears and my consequences and how I need to modify this person's behavior. She did that all on her own. And that is just spectacular to me, that here is this incredible access that we have to, the intelligence behind life, our own wisdom, and we can follow that. And that's really all we need to do as human beings. And yet there can be so much interference from adults, other people who just have to confront their fears and figure out, what we need to do to control this person, to control X, Y, and Z behavior. When really we have it within all of us, it's inside all of us to know how to move forward.
And what we were doing when we were, taking away her phone, doing all of these things, like her wisdom needed her phone, her wisdom needed contact with friends, her wisdom, like that was how she was stabilizing during a really difficult time. And when we would ground her, take her phone away, do all these things, she would just get even more like, what do I do? And so when all that was off the table, she found her equilibrium. She found the ways that worked for her to get balanced enough inside to then figure out, how do I navigate the school system that I'm in, because I really want to be in it and do what I want to do. And for the other one, it's like she figured out, like, I don't want to be in the school system, so I'm going to figure out how I'm going to do it this way. So it's like seeing that wisdom is there. And so often parents don't understand what helps young people stabilize. So that can be part of the communication, because we didn't realize how destabilizing it was to not have contact with her friends. We didn't realize that was, that would be like, putting someone in isolation.
It's like putting someone in a cage.
Yeah, like it was like, and how important that was for her to have some kind of internal stability. Like as parents, we're here, you're not alone. Like that doesn't count.
We're marvelous people.
You can hang out with us. Like, God, no, get me out of here.
We'll be your friend.
But we didn't understand. Like we did not understand the level of suffering that was created, because that was not our intent. Our intent was, well, if we take away your phone, then you'll be able to focus better, you'll study more. If you can't go out on the weekend, then you're going to figure out how to get your homework done. Like we weren't thinking like, oh my God, this is torture and you're going insane. Like we didn't think that. But that was because we were looking through our virtual reality that we're created, where for me, if I've got a lot of work, staying home, not going out on the weekend, yeah, that makes sense. Or God, I would wish someone would take my phone away and be like, sorry, I can't email you. Angus has grounded me and taken my phone away. Maybe we can implement that as a business strategy. I'm being punished. I'll have to get back to you in a month's time after my grounding. But anyway, so like we had no understanding of the level of pain and suffering that was being created, and to see it now, it's like, oh my goodness, we were just out to lunch. But that's the communication piece that I hope that if she had been able to say something more to us about it, that we would have heard it. And I also want to say that, for young people, the behavior, like she was communicating with us with her behavior as that was escalating. That was all communication, but we couldn't decode it. We interpreted it in our own way. We saw it as like, oh my gosh, she's really at risk. She's just, we've got to help her even more. That was how we interpreted it. Whereas if we had, now looking back, we say like, oh, how we're behaving, her suffering is going up and up, and she's having to go to even more extreme ways to find balance and not be caught up as much, and to let her mind settle. yeah, climbing out over the roof and jumping in a friend's car is one of the ways that we do that.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting now to see how things are unfolding, particularly for our eldest daughter, and again, I feel I can talk about this because she would be very open to talking about it herself, is that once we gave her more of a free rein to sort of follow the thread of her own wisdom, then all the things that we were panicking about, in terms of her partying and all the rest of it, then she started looking at that through a different lens. It's not something, oh, I can go and do this because this is something kind of like fun and exciting, and it's like it's illegal or whatever, illegal as far as her parents are concerned. Once that's taken off the table, she now finds herself in a position where probably, and she will tell you this herself, that there are all these kids coming into the school system, coming into the American university system, and they've had an experience, growing up as a teenager, where they've had all these boundaries in place. So they come to school and it's like, yay, it's party time, let's go crazy. And she's kind of like, you know what, I've been there, I've done that. It's like, this is just like, she's just seeing it with a completely different, set of lenses. It's to her now, yeah, I just don't need that in my life at this point. It's not necessary. And that's kind of like her wisdom, like leading the way. And that's what's kind of beautiful to see, is that giving her the luxury of following that thread, she'll make great decisions. She'll see life in a completely different way that is actually going to really allow her to grow and prosper. So in a sense, she's now telling us, she's like, yeah, I can see how these other kids have obviously had to, they felt like they've been living life in a way that feels imprisoned. And, they get to school and it's like, let's go crazy. We're let off the leash finally. And she doesn't, that wasn't her experience. She felt like she had the freedom to be able to follow her own wisdom, and all the results are there for there to see.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's all any of us can do, whether we're kids or adults. And I think we can all get caught up in the ideas of how we think it should be. And sometimes it's not even the parents that are putting on the pressure. Sometimes it's just the kids, and the kids that are around you. They're like, oh, you have to do it this way. Because now she's thinking about maybe taking some time off from school, doing something different. And all of her friends are like, oh, you can't do that. That's crazy. What are you doing? You're ruining your life. And so to be able to just fundamentally recognize that everybody's going to have their opinions, but also to recognize that we have our own sort of internal loops of anxiety that aren't that inner knowing and that inner wisdom that ultimately is going to show you whatever the next steps are, whether it's dealing with controlling anxious parents, whether it's dealing with other life choices, but that resource is there for you. And there's always a way that it's going to show you forward. And it's not going to be the same for everyone. We're not going to say like, oh, this is the 10 steps to dealing with anxious and controlling parents, because, we're all unique in our way. But it's like your wisdom is going to guide you specifically for your situation, real time, and let you know. And the most important thing is to listen to it. The most important thing is to recognize what's the voice or all of those thoughts of anxious, worried thinking, and what's that inner knowing that you have inside of you. And to really look at that as your fundamental life resource. And it doesn't really matter how much school you get, what jobs you have. Ultimately, that is the best resource that you're going to have for your whole entire life. And it's free and available.
Free and available.
Why is that so funny?
I don't know. It just sounds funny to me. I do like a freebie.
Your inner wisdom isn't going to charge you.
That's right. It's so generous. That's the thing.
That's every time I had a question, you answered it. And that must be, it was every time a question came up, I was thinking, oh, and then you answered that. So the only thing that it's not even a question, and you have answered it already, but it's more, I'm still thinking about the young people who have really controlling parents, or parents who they feel don't care about them. Actually, it's one of the things I thought of early on in what you were talking about was the kids that don't have parents, or that the parents are not around and so on, and how they manage. I mean, they very often manage a lot better than the kids with parents, because they have to follow their wisdom, and they are finding out for themselves and things, which is really interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And but for those who have really controlling parents, and I've, as a medical doctor, I saw a lot of that when they'd bring their children in, and as you say, very innocently wanting the best for their children and wanting the best for this. I can see that some of the people listening might think, oh, well, it's all very well for them because they are parents who okay, they went wrong, but they understand, and they're having mentoring, and they are willing to follow that and so on. But my parents are not like that, and they're never going to understand me, and there's no point in me communicating with them, and so on. And I know that you have said, just follow your wisdom. And I'm not sure whether they would maybe realize that was for them too. So maybe it might be worth just saying a little bit more for.
Can I start?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the most important thing is, if that's the thought coming in, to recognize that that's an assumption based on what's happened so far, and that what's happened so far doesn't predict what can happen in the future. And that's the beauty of life, is that just because something's happened so far doesn't mean it's going to keep happening. And so if there's, and we see this, Angus and I work with a lot of couples, and oftentimes both parties aren't willing to participate in the work that we do. And what we see over and over again is that even when just one person in the relationship changes, the relationship can shift. And I don't want to, put the onus on a young person, because it's always the idea that, the parents or the adults, and ultimately, the responsibilities on them. But sometimes that's not the case. And sometimes I think for our kids, our daughters were sometimes more mature than we were. Sometimes they're wiser than we were. Sometimes they had to step up before we did. And so if you're willing and open to taking that on board, that the relationship can change even if you're the only one in it that changes. And how that changes is ultimately going to come from you listening to your own wisdom and letting go of assumptions about what will be because of what's happened, and being willing inside of yourself, if you're open to that, to start with a clean slate, and to recognize that even in, horrible situations, everybody is ultimately doing the best that they can. And I'm not condoning bad behavior. I'm not saying that it's okay, but I do believe that every single one of us do the best that we can with what we understand in the moment. And so it's not personal. When someone's doing their best, it's not personal. They're just their best. And to be willing to kind of listen, and you're saying, to listen to your own wisdom, to see, given what your specific circumstances are, what would be the shift inside of you if you listen to your wisdom, what really makes sense, and allow yourself to follow that, and to just take it one step at a time without jumping to, well, I can't do that because that's not going to work. Because that's kind of how our mind works. It's like we get an idea and we're like, well, that's not going to work. We make an assumption. But if you're listening to that wisdom and it's giving you an idea, to just try it on, and it might not work in the way that you think it would. It might take you to another step or another step. But that, to me, is really the only way to navigate life. Ultimately, is one step at a time, listening to what really makes sense in that, from that place of knowing, rather than fear or anxiety and insecurity.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that comment that phrase that George Pransky is fond of using, all boats rise with the tide. And I think that, we can't expect to put too much responsibility on the teenagers' shoulders, but in a sense, I think there is some truth in that, in a way where when someone sees something, sees how the mind works, gets a greater perspective around that, then there is this sort of, I don't know, it sounds a bit woo-woo, but it's almost like there's an osmosis that takes place where, you know, when someone shows up with that understanding, it's a bit like a superpower. I know that Mara Gleason talks about it as being a superpower. And if a teenager shows up with that understanding, then the parent really gets to have this experience where a mirror is being held up to them. You know, they get to maybe like have second thoughts about how they're showing up, how they're being controlling, because they're witnessing the neutrality in their teenager. And I think that there is something really valuable to look at there, that, you know, when we get a shift in understanding, it starts to affect the people around us. And in that effect, we get to sort of like, you know, look at ourselves with a little bit more of a keen eye, if you like.
And I think it's okay to put yourself first, that your well-being is important, and that even if your parents are suffering and they're really caught up and troubled or struggling, that you can have your own well-being independent of what's going on for them, and to have it not be something that is disloyal or against them, or that, you know, they need to be better first. It's like, you know, it's okay for you to have your well-being and to live life from there. And everybody, that's really their own responsibility. And you can't change your parents. They may change through conversation and understanding, but it's not your responsibility to make them change. But that doesn't mean that you can't have your own well-being if they don't.
Yeah. I think it's also the other thing to consider, which might be reassuring for people, for teenagers, is that when it comes to wisdom, it's a level playing field. It's like we all have access to the same resource. You know, we all have our intellectual capacity, we all have our hard drive, and we all have our own programming. But beyond that, there's something much more powerful, much more valuable. And in that sense, it's like no one has, you know, greater access to that in a sense than anyone else, or the right to access it than anybody else.
Yeah, and that oftentimes younger people are more connected with that, just innately, intuitively, that they're less conditioned out of it. And so sometimes the teenager really is the one that has the most wisdom in the household. But the most important thing is, I love what you're saying, I guess, that it is an even playing field. It's not, oh, parents have more wisdom because they've lived more years. It doesn't work that way. That what we're talking about is absolutely equal for every single one of us. And that you don't have to be a certain age in order to make that available to you. It is there. It has always been there. It always will be there. And for that to really be what you look toward for your compass point, however you recognize that for yourself.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, I think. Thank you very much. If anyone watching, even on the replays, does have questions and so on, though, we will have links on the website at thesecretofeverything.com to how to get in touch with you. They can also leave questions and comments underneath the video on YouTube. So thank you very much. That's been really, really good. And I'm sure a lot of people will get a lot out of that, even if it's only laughing. I think it was.
Hey, it's all about the feeling, isn't it?
Exactly.
Your craziness. Well, thank you so much, Anne. Really appreciate everything that you're doing, and just want to support you in bringing this work into the world in the way that you're doing it.
Yeah, 100%.
Thanks. Thank you very much. And it's been lovely having you here.
Thank you.
See you again soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.